Darwin made a great discovery, as everybody knows. It's the discovery of the evolutionary process of life forms. So that's which is undoubtedly the case. Unfortunately, at the same time, there's also what I see as a very grave error in that it has had enormous consequences. And the error behind the theory of evolution is that it is purely chance, that there's absolutely no guiding intelligence behind it. And that has seeped into the collective consciousness of humanity, has affected millions of humans, whether they know it or not. And it's there in the mainstream culture, and that is that the universe is largely purposeless. Everything is a product of chance events. And at one stroke that has removed meaning and purpose from the whole of existence. Although some philosopher tried to rebel against it and come up with some secondary purpose, existentialist philosophers and so on. Or Nietzsche said, of course, his famous statement, God is dead. And he also said somewhere that humanity must give itself a purpose, since God is dead. But I don't see how that could work, to come up or invent some kind of purpose. But if you look with an unprejudiced mind at all the phenomena on our planet, the life forms on our planet, I believe you will find that there could not possibly be not a guiding intelligence behind it all. The whole idea of manifestation is, of course, based on the premise that there is, underlying the world of phenomena, the sense-perceived world, that there is a substratum of intelligence that is, of course, invisible to our senses, that there's a substratum that underlies all the phenomena in the universe. Whether you call that God or divine intelligence or the emanation of God, if it's not God, there may be a source from which this field of intelligence continuously emanates, in the same way that light emanates from the sun. And it's not only through looking at the phenomena around you with an unprejudiced eye that you will discover that there must be an intelligence behind that. Even more importantly, you look into yourself. And I've been using the expression a substratum of an unseen space or field. And of course, if that's in the universe, it must also be in yourself. And so the best place to look for it is in yourself. But if you look for it, you may not find it. That's the problem. In fact, if you look for it, you probably won't find it. And the reason is that this intelligence is formless, so it cannot become an object in your consciousness like everything else that you perceive or are aware of is an object that arises in your consciousness. I call it your consciousness, but it's not yours. An object that arises in consciousness. It could be a sense perception. There's a table, a tree. You're aware of it. The object arises. It could be a thought. The thought form arises in consciousness. It could be an emotion or feeling that arises in consciousness. But if you look for the underlying intelligence, it cannot become an object in your consciousness because that intelligence is the eternal subject. So you can never say, there it is, I found it. All you could say, if you realized it, is I am it. If you say I am it, there's no duality, because it and I are one. But if you say, there it is, or I found it, then there's a duality. There's you and there's it. And who is talking? If you found the intelligence, who are you? So the answer is quite simple, and that is, if we now let's say, let's use an analogy that if you're looking for it, and this looking is like a beam of light. I'm looking for, where is that intelligence? That thing that's looking, which is not a thing, is it. So the very consciousness with which you're looking for it is it. That's why you are what you're looking for. So if you're looking for God, ultimately that applies, because God is another word for it, although I would say that the intelligence that underlies the universe, in my worldview, is the emanation of God. It emanates like the light emanates from the sun. But it is, as an emanation, it is inseparable from God, from the source. And the consciousness that you are is essentially that emanation. The consciousness is the light, so to speak, that emanates from the source. So you, the essence of who you are, which is consciousness, emanates from the source of all life continuously and is not separate from it. In that sense, if you say, I am God, you are both right and wrong. In the same way that if a ray of sunlight said, I am the sun, it would be absurd because the ray of sunlight is nothing compared to the sun, so you could laugh, and yet the ray of sunlight is undoubtedly still in connectedness with the sun and is part of the sun. Although I would recommend to the ray of sunlight not to say, I am the sun, because that sounds a little absurd, but ultimately it's true. So can you become aware of yourself as that consciousness? And when you become aware of that consciousness, then you are in touch with the underlying intelligence of the universe. But even that is not totally correct when I use those words. You are in touch with the again, immediately as the moment you use language, you create a duality. So it's better to say you realize yourself. But when you realize yourself, then your ultimate reason there is no you apart from the universe. So that realization is the universe realizing itself. The universe that temporarily comes in the disguise of a person, a little brief, very fleeting emanation, a very fleeting form it takes. But in that very fleeting form, it realizes itself, its own nature. Now, we've talked before about the universe delighting in creation. It delights to create, and it creates continuously. It's continuously active. Everywhere there's life arising, continuously active and infinitely abundant. So there is at the source of all life, there is an infinitely abundant source. That is, the sun is a good analogy or example of that, because the sun, it's unbelievable that there's an outpouring of energy. It goes on for millions of years, although it has also a lifespan, but relative to our lifespan, we could virtually say the sun is virtually eternal. It's not eternal, but for millions and millions of years, it's an inexhaustible source of energy that gives life to everything, physical life. And so there's a deeper source out of which the sun has also come. That is, the sun is also a creation of that. So, life, the universe loves to create. It's infinitely abundant. And you are an intrinsic part of the universe. So creation or creativity is also part of what your purpose here is. And we'll look at that in more detail. So you could say then that the universe delights in, you remember we used the two terms being and doing. The universe delights in doing. But now we could say that the doing is the outward movement of the universe. It is the creative outward flow of the universe. It flows out. But there is an opposite movement also at work in the universe, and that is the pull back to the source. So there are two movements in the universe. There's the outward flow into manifestation, and there is a pull back into the unmanifested source. So the universe exists. There's a tension that is part of the universe, that is the pull back to the source and the outward flow of continuing creativity. The pull back to the source is manifested as you experience. Even the most unconscious human experiences it every few hours. The universe pulls you back into the unmanifested, and it does that not only to humans, it does that to every life form, except perhaps the most rudimentary life forms. And we call that sleep. There's an irresistible pull that pulls you into that state where you disappear temporarily. First you go through the dream stage, and then, as is well known, you go into dreamless sleep, the deepest sleep, where there's nothing. And you have to go there. Isn't it amazing that all human beings and all life forms, every few hours, they become completely, literally unconscious. Every few hours, the entire planet goes. No, to us it's so normal that you don't even wonder. Of course, I need to sleep, but isn't it strange that there's that movement that nobody could resist, and if you try to resist it, you would become insane and you would die. If you resist that pull, and that's very unconscious. It's unconscious. You have to go there. That's one manifestation of the movement back to the source, without which the universe could not exist. It needs that continuous movement back to the source. But another manifestation of that is the fact that every life form is short-lived. So sleep and death are manifestations of the pull back to the source. Everything needs to not only sleep, it also needs to... And sleep is a form of death, although the physical body still survives. You temporarily die. When you die, if you go to sleep, for people, death is such a terrible idea. They think, oh my God, death. You die every night. Except when death, you don't come back into this dimension anymore. It would just be another sleep form. Is it so terrible that you go to sleep and then you don't wake up in this dimension anymore? Or you don't wake up at all, even if that's were the case. That's not so bad. I believe it was Mark Twain who said, I don't understand why people are so afraid of death. He said, you were already dead for millions of years before you were born. Was that so bad? But of course, you were not dead. The essence of who you are is consciousness, and consciousness is timeless. But the important thing here is to see that there is a pull back to source. There is a pull back out of that. Every life form, that which animates the life form is pulled back after a little while. And that's called death. The form then collapses. But then a point is reached in the evolution of the universe where this pullback manifests in a different way. And this is what is happening to us here. We return consciously to the source, not unconsciously. when the mind ceases, consciousness remains. It's like being awake in dreamless sleep. And that's an amazing thing that is possible. That is a conscious return to source. And that is something that, as far as humans are concerned, is a relatively recent thing, only a few thousand years, which is not much. And only a few, of course, have consciously realized that this return to the source is possible. Then some of those didn't want to come back into join the outward movement again. So there have been in the past few thousand years spiritual humans who had spiritual realization lost all interest in participating anymore in the outward movement of the universe, because it was so fulfilling to realize the source of their being that they said, "What? I have no reason for doing anything anymore. What would the reason be for doing anything? This is the source. This is the time, this essence of who I am." Now these people still, even in India, there are still ascetics who have given up all desires as far as participation in the creative process is concerned, and they just are immersed in being. In Christianity, you have to go back a little bit into the past to find people like that. In the Middle Ages, there were hermits and ascetics also, in certain monastic traditions. Or if you go back to the early times of Christianity, there were the desert fathers. These were hermits that lived. They did not want any more contact with any other humans, and they lived on almost nothing. They eating locusts and living in the middle of the desert. Some of them almost became spiritual teachers, so they attracted some people who thought, "Wow, this person has something incredible. He has this emanation. What is that?" So some attracted followers, but they were not interested in followers. So when you realize the essence of who you are, then this also happened to me for a while. I lost all interest in future, because future implies that it's still something for you to do. And all doing happens, of course, when you have it needs time. Any doing needs time. And I'd lost interest in future because the present was so fulfilling. And for a couple of years or so, I lost that interest completely. And then gradually, as I was approached by people, they asking questions, and I started to explain more things that I didn't know I knew, just came out of my mouth. And so in a way, ever since I've been doing, but paradoxically, my doing is the teaching of being. So when I travel to give a talk or something like that, I seem to be doing something, and then I give it, or I write a book that's doing. But all the doing that I do is in the service of being. So it's a little paradox there. But I still do other doing too, of course. I take a shower in the morning and go shopping And so there's the doing that's associated with everyday living. So you will discover in yourself the two movements also. You will be pulled into just wanting to be, and then also you realize, oh, there's something for me to do here. You will feel a desire rising to create. The Buddha said the greatest obstacle to awakening is desire. Now, he was speaking of this longing for fulfillment that arises from the egoic state of consciousness, which is always unfulfilled. And so the longing of the egoic state of consciousness is the desire that the Buddha speaks of. But now the question arises, does the universe come to the end of its desire? Because the universe has a desire to create too. I don't know if we probably should call it desire in the case of the universe. It just does it. It creates. Does it stop creating when through a human it realizes its own source, it realizes its essence? Or is it possible that then a different stage happens in the way in which the universe creates, a different stage of the evolutionary process of the universe? Before the universe created, all the life forms were undergoing an involuntary movement, were part of the creative process in an involuntary way. But now, as humans awaken, yes, the temptation may arise in some to cease from all creation and to simply enjoy being. And I'm not saying that every human needs to create. There is a long contemplative tradition in many spiritual movements, many spiritual traditions. There's a contemplative stream. It's in the contemplative stream is there in Christianity, in mystical Christianity. It's there very strongly in Buddhism. It's there obviously in Hinduism. The Sufism in the Islamic tradition could also be considered as the contemplative tradition. The contemplative tradition is your main purpose is to remain rooted in being. There are not many humans that are called to that. There are not many humans for whom that is a purpose, but there are some. I have a name that I've given them in one of my books. They are the frequency holders. These are humans who have no particular external purpose except to be. Of course, they have to do something. Every human has to engage in some kind of activity, but the activity may be very simple. It may be something to do with plants or gardening or something to do with their hands. So that might be a lovely, beautiful activity, or a very simple job, perhaps. It could be anything. It could be working in a simple job that gives them enough income to live on, and they have no desire beyond that. That there are some humans, but there's a danger in that also, and that is that they will gradually, without knowing it, experience a decrease in their alertness, and they may fall below thought instead of remaining above thought. This course is primarily directed at the majority of humans who still have a purpose in this lifetime. And the question is, what form does this purpose take when the ego is no longer active in you, or the ego has subsided substantially or has even disappeared? Because anybody who is in connectedness with being, with the essence, is no longer dominated by the ego, although it is possible that, and this is very common, that humans fluctuate in the degree of their realization. They fluctuate, especially after they first discover the possibility of living in connectedness with Source. They fluctuate, they lose themselves again and again in the world, and ego returns. Then they suffer. The suffering wakes them up again. Then they return to being, and then they remain rooted in being. And it is often the challenges that every human encounters that are actually the most vital thing that drives you back when you've lost connectedness with being. The challenges, which means the difficulties you encounter in life, the obstacles you encounter, the breakdowns you encounter, the illnesses, the losses, those challenges, the difficult people, those challenges increase your readiness to reconnect with Source. They drive you back into yourself once you have reached a certain stage. So you need the challenges. Be grateful for the challenges, because they will gradually help you to stay connected with Source. And then the challenges still arise, but they are not all that problematic anymore. Now, when you are connected with Source, many of your aims will change. At first, you may experience a complete absence of aim for a while, because it is so enjoyable to remain immersed in the joy. I could call it the joy of being, because there's a deep underlying joy in being, in experiencing yourself as being, as just. This is why in India, in Indian spirituality, they have a word for it, and that word is Sat Chit Ananda, which is really stringing together three words: Sat, Chit and Ananda. Sat means being. Chit means consciousness. And Ananda means bliss. And these three are three aspects of that state of connectedness with being. Sat Chit Ananda, awareness of being. Sat Chit, Chit consciousness. Sat, being, consciousness of being, is at the same time Ananda, which is usually translated as bliss, but it could also be translated as, I would prefer joy, a deep, it's not pleasure, because pleasure is some substance, that's something you take on from the outside. That's pleasure is something from the outside. Even if it's the outside, even your body is the outside. So even sexual pleasure would be, I would consider an outside thing. You derive pleasure from your body. You derive pleasure from a substance, from food, from whatever it may be. Pleasure. Joy is not taken from the out. Joy arises from within your innermost nature. So I prefer joy to bliss, because bliss sounds a little bit too out there, ecstatic, and you go, ah, and in bliss. It's not that kind of joy. Is a deep, abiding sense of deep, alive peace. So being, consciousness, bliss, the connectedness with Source. And your first inclination may be, well, I don't really want to do anything anymore. And often people have approached me with that question and have said, I have lost the desire to do anything, or I don't have ambitions anymore, and I'm getting a little worried sometimes when I start thinking about it. But otherwise, when I'm not thinking about it, I'm actually fine with it. So that you may experience that, and now the important thing is for you to become alert, and it's almost in a kind of listening, attitude of listening. Ask yourself, what is there while I'm still here in this dimension? What is there for me to do? So this is the doing that does not imply loss of being. It is a doing that is inspired by being. But so you have to enter a state of a kind of alert listening and ask yourself, well, should I continue with my job, for example? Of course, you may have to go there anyway to make it, earn a living. Do I continue with my job and or are there other things for me to do, or is there a way in which I can deepen what I'm doing already? What is it that the universe, or the intelligence that underlies the universe, wants me to do? So it's not a question anymore of what do I want? It's not a question anymore, what do I need? The question is, what does the universe want from me? How does the universe want me to contribute? And then you can treat it as a kind of meditation. It's also possible that you will know it very quickly, that there is something for you to do, and a vision may come to you, or you may find that what you're doing already, you now bring a different state of consciousness to what you're doing already, and that changes the way in the how you do what you're doing already. It could be a job that you're doing, but suddenly you're doing it very consciously. Suddenly the the way in which you treat your job changes because you bring an attention to it. And then you may not necessarily be called upon to change what you're doing, but how you do what you're doing changes. And how you do what you're doing is always more important than the what. The how, because how implies what is the state of consciousness behind the doing. The how is always more important than the what. So then people have reported to me that they realized that their present activity was not the best vehicle for bringing consciousness into this world, because they began to realize that actually my purpose is to bring the flow of consciousness into this world. I am the bringer of consciousness. I am the vehicle through which consciousness enters this dimension. And it can enter this dimension in different ways. Consciousness through me, when I'm connected with the spacious source, the formless, unconditioned consciousness, then this intelligence is no longer obstructed by the egoic mind. But this intelligence will use your mind. It will use and inspire your mind. Your mind becomes a vital instrument for the expression of this intelligence. Not the only, but a vital instrument. When I say not the only, I mean that this intelligence can also simply emanate from you wherever you are or whoever you are with. If you are connected with that, then you represent that stillness, that people can sense that there is something in you that is so deeply rooted in being that people just want to be near you, or they want to figure out what you're all about. And so, or even if they don't, you just, in any interaction, you emanate that vitally alive peace that transcends the person or the personality, that has nothing to do with the person or the personality. So you can bring consciousness into this world simply by emanating, yes, but probably there will be more for you. There will be also doing involved. You can also, yes, of course, you can also emanate consciousness through any activity that you're engaged in, and you find that it gets taken over. Suddenly the activity becomes empowered or inspired by this greater intelligence. So the wonderful thing is, it could be dance, it could be artistic creation. It's you're in connectedness with this unconditioned intelligence. Now, the unconditioned intelligence can only express itself if it uses your mind in certain ways that have to do with the actual conditioning of your mind. So, in other words, the unconditioned intelligence through my mind cannot come up with a great answer to what is a solution to Einstein's problem that he never solved of the unified field theory. And I can predict that the answer to this will not come through my mind, nor will the answer to a great mathematical problem comes to my mind, or whatever else that my mind is not suitable for, has not been trained in that way. But my mind is good with, it's been trained with words, so perhaps the only really useful thing at university was it trained my mind to be able to formulate sentences coherently in writing, and able to analyze and look at how to use words, and learning to think more clearly. And that's fine, because the mind is a beautiful, wonderful tool. We've been talking about the mind as an obstacle, which it is when you are possessed by it. When you are possessed by it, the mind is your pseudo-self. The mind is the false self. The mind is a great troublemaker. The mind creates havoc on the planet. The mind is lethal. The mind is the unobserved egoic mind in its collective aspect is dangerously insane. Just look at the history of humanity. Look at the hundreds and hundreds of millions of humans killed by other humans in only half a century, the first half of the 20th century. Not only world wars, but hundreds of millions of humans killed by their own governments. Germany is well known, Russia is not as well known. Hundreds of millions of humans killed through communist China, Cambodia, the most recent thing. We visited Cambodia a few years ago and saw the havoc that, well, when they had their regime of the communist regime of Khmer Rouge, almost 50% of the population killed. So it's totally don't underestimate the insanity of the human mind in the absence of awareness, in the absence of that deeper consciousness. The mind that is totally self-possessed, it's an entity that inhabits human beings, pretends to be who they are, is bad enough as the individual egoic mind, but infinitely worse as the collective egoic mind. The infinite says I, and is looking for enhancing its I, and the collective mind says we, and so it needs its enemies, and it will create enemies, and it loves its enemies. It defines itself through its enemies, and then it seeks to destroy its enemies. Although if all enemies were destroyed, its whole pseudo identity would collapse, because without the enemies you have no identity whatsoever. So don't underestimate, but also see, once the shift has happened, the mind is no longer egoically possessed, then for the first time you can actually think clearly. You can only think clearly when you have the ability to be still. You can only think clearly when you have the ability to not think. It's not even a requirement to not think for long periods of time. Just the requirement to not think to have the spaces when thought subsides and you're just present. We'll do some exercises later on. Thought subsides and you're just present. And there's a stillness, an alert stillness. And any situation that needs some kind of action, that is a challenge, a problem, a situation that you need to deal with, you look at it, so to speak, which means you direct your attention to it, and you become still and alert. And after that, whether that lasts for half a minute or 5 minutes, then you start thinking again. And if not the first time, after a few times, or perhaps the first time, when you start thinking again, the likelihood of coming to an intelligent decision, an intelligent action, is far greater now, because you're in touch with the unconditioned dimension of your consciousness, and so that your mind is able to be much more intelligent suddenly, truly intelligent. Which is not necessarily the intelligence that is measured by IQ tests. IQ tests measure a certain aspect of intelligence, but intelligence is vast. And the intelligence that you're now in touch with is not in its raw primordial state, isn't the conceptual intelligence, although eventually it might be translated into concepts when you start thinking and speaking, and the thinking and speaking is empowered. But you contact this intelligence, you are this intelligence in its non-conceptual form or no form. It is non-conceptual intelligence. This is not something you could measure. Certainly no IQ tests for it. You might be interested to know that I just cannot do IQ tests. My mind does not work in that way. So my mind, the underlying intelligence would not be able to use this mind for certain purposes that require the IQ type of intelligence. So I'm not going to come up with any great discovery in the field of mathematics, physics, and so on. But other people may. Einstein had a mind that was naturally, without even having to read any spiritual books or going into spiritual teachings, Einstein's mind was naturally attuned with that stillness. So he was slow, his mind had a natural slowness. His mind was so slow, which meant he could think deeply. Thinking deeply means becoming still and then thinking. Becoming still and then thinking again. Stillness, thinking. That's what we mean when the actual meaning of thinking deeply, as anybody who has made great discoveries, whether in science or incredible creations in the works in philosophy or in literature or music, anybody who is able to be truly creative is able to think deeply. But think deeply means you have a balance between being and doing. Being and doing in balance, and you think thinking deeply means to be periodically dip into no thinking. Then thinking becomes deep and creative. So the underlying intelligence will use your mind, and it will use it in a way that it is able to use your mind. So your mind is not going to be, the intelligence cannot use your mind for something that your mind is not suitable for or trained for. Of course, it could be trained in the future, but it will seek an avenue of expression that corresponds to an ability that is already there in you, but perhaps undeveloped as yet, or already developed. So you become a vehicle for consciousness to come into this world in one way or another. It could just be in personal relationships of, let's say you're in a helping profession. If you're in a helping profession, the way in which you relate to others, let's say you are a nurse, you are a doctor, you are a therapist, you are a hospice worker, the way in which, or you work in a kindergarten, or you're a teacher teaching children, the way in which you relate to other humans will change. There is a dimension, an added dimension to it that changes the way in which you affect other humans. And so it may be the case as you become more conscious, the conscious manifestation does not always mean something totally new. You could manifest a higher consciousness without changing what you're doing. Simply a change just happens in the way in which you are doing it, because when you are rooted in being, every human interaction, in addition to whatever the interaction is about on a superficial level, in addition to that interaction, there is an energy frequency, so to speak. There's an energy field, even in short interactions. And you don't do it by choice. You don't. There's no thinking involved for that. You don't think, okay, I'm now affecting this human being. None of that. But there's simply this underlying stillness brings in a deeper connectedness with every human being. And in that deeper connectedness with every human being, something responds in the other human. They may not know that, but something you call forth their essential being too. And it might not have any lasting effects, or it might, but it might just be something, and then they meet you again and there's something there. So this is particularly wonderful for anybody whose job involves dealing with human beings in whatever capacity. So as this shift in consciousness happens, the way in which you do what you do changes, and for those people, that may well be that you continue doing what you're doing, but now with this added dimension. Or it could be that you, as you go into that stillness periodically, and you realize there's something else for me to do, rather than doing what I'm doing now. But what is it? You ask the question, and you may get an answer as a thought, or a mental image, or as an external event, meeting a person who says this or that, or something coming to you from the external, and seeing, oh, there's something there, something for me to do. So the first step is often, if you feel, but the important thing is, whatever it is that you are doing at present, continue to do it until you find something else arising. But while you do it, even if it's a repetitive thing, bring as much consciousness to it as you can. So the manifesting, the deepest level of manifestation is not the manifestation of external structures or events, or that may come later. In the first instance, manifestation is the manifestation of a new state of consciousness that emanates from you. And That happens naturally when you live in connectedness with being. The transcendent dimension, which is what it is, then changes the entire way in which you experience reality. Initially, before the transcendent dimension remains a permanent thing within you, permanently manifesting within you, you need to invite it into your life. Remember to invite it into your life. And that's a practice. And that's a practice that your mind, egoic mind, will tell you that you're too busy right now and you just have to deal with this and that and the other first before you can bring the transcendent dimension into this moment. You say, well, not now, but let me first do that. And then there's something else. And then there comes the excuse in your mind. And this is something after you've already had glimpses of it, perhaps here and now. You've had glimpses of it in yourself, that there have been brief moments when thinking subsided and there was a sense of well-being and connectedness and peace. And then the mind came in and said, yeah, but you've got problems. You should be thinking and solving your problems first, shouldn't you? No, you have to be aware of this trap. When you've had glimpses of realization, and then beware of the trap of the mind coming in, the conditioned mind, and says, this doesn't help you deal with your problems. There's so much you have to sort out. Why don't you do your spiritual work when you've sorted out your problematic life situation? First, I need to find more job security because my job is so uncertain. I just can't settle down to any kind of inner work. I've got too much to deal with there and there and there. Too many demands. I can't. Maybe next year when I'm on vacation I can try it. Or you can think some imaginary thoughts that if only I had enough money and I could be at this very peaceful, I wouldn't need to work anymore, and then I could really do it. That doesn't work. So you start with where you are. When your mind says no time to do it, then you do it anyway. And I'm using the word do in the wrong way because what happens is you relinquish doing for a moment. Bring in transcendent moments into everyday life. Transcendent moments. One conscious breath. Looking at the sky for a few seconds. Looking at a plant in your office, in a plant in a pot. Looking at the plant for a few seconds. Feeling your inner body for a few seconds. Looking at any object for a few seconds. Listening to any noise for a few seconds without labeling it mentally, without interpreting, without judging. Looking at something without interpreting, without judging, appreciating it for what it is. Every day, I'll tell you this, and it's not a practice, it's a natural thing. I sit in my living room or my study, or I stand And I look around at the room and the pieces of furniture, and I love that presence of those things. They have that lovely, they're just so still, they have a still, just a very simple beingness, a very simple presence. They just are. And I look and it's lovely. Or I look out of this window, there's the sky. I had to resist, become aware when I got my first iPhone. The screen is so seductive that I noticed after a while, usually I wake up in the morning and I look out of the window and, well, then you see what the weather is like or look at the sky. And then I noticed I had the phone next to my bed, and one day arrived when I woke up and I reached out and took my phone to find out what the weather was like. Why didn't I look out of the window? There was an abstract weather app that said, oh, today it's cloudy. Oh, well, I could have known that by just looking out of the window. That much better. This is just a tiny example how seductive these things are. So leave them well alone so that they don't impinge upon your life unnecessarily. You have to be really careful, because this inviting transcendence into your life is greatly impeded, hindered, not only by all the things that happen in your life around you, not only by your own mind, but also by all the devices that the mind has created in order to amplify itself. I'm not saying that these devices are all negative. Potentially, they could also help to live more consciously. But it's still the influence they have on the mind at the moment, especially in the young generation, cannot possibly be regarded as helpful as far as awakening is concerned. In fact, could probably have the opposite effect, because the clutter they inflict on your mind is just inconceivable. The clutter of totally useless information and knowledge, the clutter of amplifying your egoic mind by creating an image on the screen of who you are that you present to the world, that you send out into all your hundreds of so-called friends, many of which have never met you. And you send this, I'm talking, young people do that a lot, up to what age, I don't know. And you have to be really careful with that, because if you get so involved in that, how can the transcendent dimension arise in you if your mind is continuously cluttered and continuously bombarded with new input? So you need to create spaces as much as you can. Invite the transcendent dimension into your life. It perhaps can be done with the devices, because there are some apps on there that are actually miraculously, that you can get apps that actually create stillness in you. You can find out what they are. It's not difficult to find. So they can be used in a good way too. But better than any device, invite transcendence into your life as much as you can. We'll do more exercises later. This is for daily living. And then gradually it stays with you, even while you're engaged in other things. And then you are asking, what remains for me to do while I'm still here in this body, so to speak, in this dimension. What is it that the universe wants me to do in order to bring consciousness? Is it just to bring more consciousness to what I'm doing already? Is it writing a book? Is it writing, creating artwork? Is it setting up a company as a conscious business? Is it going somewhere in the world and help people? So many. Is it creating a YouTube channel and teach people to live consciously? Anybody can do that. So there are some good aspects to the technological revolution. Anybody can get any message out into the world, and in many cases it's insane or mad or meaningless, but there are people who are doing wonderful work. They're individuals who are affecting thousands and hundreds of thousands of people through just creating a YouTube channel and spirit. There are now some spiritual teachers that have become well known only through YouTube. So there are possibilities. The universe will then show you. Now, how does it show you that? It shows you that as a vision, a realization, or something coming from outside of you, somebody talking to you and suddenly suggesting this or that. The interesting thing is when you are connected with a transcendent dimension, the intelligence works not only through your mind, although it does that too. The intelligence works under the surface of things, affecting other people and situations too that become helpful to you. And this especially applies once you know what it is what you want. Once you have said, now I know I need to do this, then you begin conscious manifestation. Once you know this is the course of action I want to take, this is the vision I have, this is what I want to do. That is, and you realize, how do you know that that's not your ego? Well, you know that because it arises not out of a sense of lack or neediness. The best recognition that it's not your ego is, first of all, the act of doing whatever you are doing towards what it is that you want to achieve. And it may be that you're starting to use conscious manifestation techniques such as affirmations or visualizations. Those are the two main techniques. We may look in detail later. Affirmations that state certain things, visualizations. Most people have heard of vision boards. And again, this is something that the universe wants to create through you. That is not something that you come up with because you need this to make you feel better or more complete or more fulfilled. Once you start acting, in addition to using affirmations, you begin to take action because you need the two. The affirmation is putting out a thought into the universe, and thought is creative. This is a thought that's not a conditioned thought, but a thought that is a statement, and that goes into the formless and creates form. And you think you are doing it, but really you are not doing anything. The universe is doing it through you and through your mind. So it's a secondary creation. The universe, instead of creating directly a plant, a fish, an animal, a tree, it creates through you. And when the universe creates through you, secondary creation, and that's the next stage in evolution, The universe uses your mind. The intelligence uses your mind. And then there may be a case here for affirmations, because an affirmation is a thought that you send out that is the blueprint, so to speak, for creation of form. Before form arises, it's a thought that applies on every level. Before you build something, you have the thought of what it is. Before the architect builds a house, the architect has a thought, and then the architect takes action. Now, this architect, let's stay with the architect for a moment. This architect, the usual way is, let's say the architect has a plan for most fantastic building, and so the architect begins to work. First it's in the mind, and then it's on paper, and then it's on the computer. But first it's the house is in the mind, and then it gradually translates into external form. It goes on paper, goes into the computer, and then, of course, let's say the architect, then there are other factors involved, and while he or she is engaged in the act of creation, still, if the architect is in touch with the transcendent dimension, she will be able to, while in the act of creation, become still and then create, become still and then create, or continue to create with sensing the power of presence in the background, and then create and think and draw and think and draw. So the creation becomes inspired, and then perhaps there's a stage where the architect says, okay, I haven't actually found anybody to finance my building. This is the most fantastic. Most architects don't work like that, but let's say this one does. The architect says, okay, now this is the most fantastic thing. It's coming through me, but now I need somebody to finance it. This building will have wonderful feng shui, wonderful emanation. People who are in it will greatly enhance their well-being, and I know this is going to be wonderful. Not like the carbuncles, as Prince Charles calls modern architecture. No, it will be very different. And this may be a place for the next step. Could be an affirmation that you're stating that you're finding someone who is happy to finance this. And this affirmation would never say, no, we'll look at it in more detail later, but let's just start with this. If the architect says, I'm going to find somebody, or let's say, I want to find somebody who is happy to finance this beautiful building, that's not a good affirmation. Because if you say, I want to find somebody, it means you haven't, it's not, that person isn't there yet. I don't have that person. You never say I want, you never say I need, you never say I will, because that's put it into the future. All affirmations need to be stated in the present tense. There is somebody who is happy to finance this wonderful project. There is somebody who is already waiting, only waiting to finance such a beautiful project as I have. And I know this person is in my life now. And next, you always add a little thankfulness to it. I'm grateful for having this person who is financing my great work of art. Now, I'm going to read from the Bible. This is very important in case you don't know it yet, what Jesus says about manifestation of this kind. Here it is. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, prayer is a term for affirmation here. Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Now that's the key statement. It's not that you're going to receive it. On an inner dimension of consciousness, it has already happened or is happening. It's the present. It's not something that's going to... Then no affirmation is powerful and it's going to work unless it's already the case. And that is called faith, that you have the faith that this already... Now, what does that mean? To have the faith means you can sense the power that creates this, the power that is inseparable, the power of being that you sense is the unformed version of what it is, the form that you want to bring about. So you can already sense, to put it, let's put it in more simple terms for a moment. There's no difference between making that statement and at the same time feeling, what does it feel like to sense the reality of what you're saying. So there's a person who is happy to finance this wonderful project, and at this moment you feel the aliveness of that already. You can feel how the power that's behind that. It's making no difference whether it's actually an external reality or only an internal reality. You feel exactly the same. So you already, the feeling is exactly the same as if this were reality already, because on an inner level it is reality. So this comes out of the fullness of being. So the event that you want to create comes out of the fullness of being. It comes out of you, so to speak. It's not so much not that you attract it from the outside. It's more that it flows from the power that is within you, the abundance, the fullness of life, as Jesus puts it. He said, I want you to have the fullness of life, or in some translations, life in its fullness. And what does that mean? It means to sense life in its fullness within you. It does not mean having countless possessions, although it can be sometimes translated into form, but the fullness itself is the formless life, the formless consciousness. I want you to have life in its fullness, means I want you to be rooted in that aware, spacious presence, the unconditioned consciousness, the eternal I am. And out of that you create. So any statement you make, it's called an affirmation. It's always in the present tense, and you always feel that it's already here. And most importantly, making that statement, there's no willpower behind it. You don't say, there's somebody who is financing my, and then you increase your willpower, or you start shouting. That does not work. You don't have to do it. You just state it. The power does it for you. It does not involve any kind of, in fact, that would be a great obstacle, and it would be the ego coming in through the back door. The important thing is the enjoyment in this practice. That is part of the power. The practice is not inferior to the desired outcome. You're not going to feel better when the desired outcome materializes than you feel already. And if the desired outcome should not materialize, for whatever reason, you've had a good time practicing this wonderful energy, and perhaps something else comes instead. So there's a joy in there's not only the joy in the affirmation, because there's an energy, it's an energy outflow from you, from within you. There's a joy in the affirmation. Then the intelligence, the underlying intelligence of the universe, then gives it form according to the words. You have spoken the word. You remember, this is the same act of creation through you as the act of creation. You remember in the Bible, at the beginning of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, says John. The word, the translation is the Logos. Logos is the Greek, the original term. In the beginning was the Word which was spoken. The Word emanates from God. And the Word is the underlying intelligence that creates form. In the beginning was the Word. And John didn't come up with that in the Gospel. It wasn't originally part of the Christian teaching. The term is borrowed from ancient Greek philosophy, the concept of logos. That's the underlying intelligence. It doesn't mean logic, although the word is derived from it. So, and that word, that is the creative element in the universe. So it can come through you also. That's the next, as I said, the next stage in creation. It says here, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received and will be yours. I would add here the words within reason, because you cannot ask just anything, because that would be absurd. Imagine me asking, I want to be the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. That's my real aim, and that will fulfill me. No matter how much I ask in prayer, that's not going to happen, unless, of course, I leave this body and look for another one. So there are certain things that are outside the realm of the limitations of form. But yet there are many possibilities. There are miraculous possibilities, yes, but there are also limitations of form, and you have to look at that and don't be crazy and ask for something that is virtually impossible as yet for you. Now here comes another statement that's just before Jesus says that. He says this, truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. So this is a very extreme statement, but I believe ultimately true, but not yet for humanity. The way humanity is going, if humanity survives the upcoming critical transition from one state of consciousness to another, there's no guarantee of anything. If humanity survives and makes it to the next level of consciousness, a time will come, I'm convinced of that. At the moment it's not yet possible, except in small measure, that humans will create simply by applying thought, and create form simply through applying thought, and move anything in this world simply because everything, even seemingly material objects, the matter is just an appearance. There is ultimately no such thing as matter. There's only energy. And all energy exists in the one energy field of universal consciousness. So the mountain exists in the universal consciousness, appearing to us as very heavy matter. when we are totally aligned with universal consciousness, then anything within the universal consciousness can easily be created or changed or removed. So one day humans will be able to, but the strange paradox is they will use it very little because they don't need it. They're connected with being, and there is not that much that they need. And they have long transcended ego. So if humans were able to do that and still have ego, they would create total havoc in the universe. It would destroy the entire universe. If they could do anything or create anything through the applied power of their minds. But once humans are free of ego and are connected, then it's no longer the humans who do it. It's the universe that does it through the humans. And then that is the very, at the moment, seemingly still very distant stage in human evolution, unless it gets speeded up, whether that happens in 5,000 years' time or in 500,000 years' time or in 1 million years' time, we don't know. And then probably humans will not perceive themselves anymore as physical bodies. And yes, then humans will have that seemingly divine power, but this is the beginning of it, and this is very important that we are going that way. So you can move mountains with faith, but not yet. There's a funny story of there was a woman who she read this, or her pastor read this to her, or she heard it in church, and said, "Oh." And she had a little hill in front of her house that obstructed her view. And so the woman said, "Oh, Jesus says we can move mountains, so I'll see if I can move that hill." So she thought very hard before going to bed, says, "Okay, hill, you go away. In the morning, you're not going to be there anymore. I command you to go away." And so in the morning, she woke up, and she opened the curtains, and the hill was still there. And so she said, "Oh, I knew it wasn't going to work." So in the next session, we are going to look in more detail at how to practice this in the right way, and possibly also look at the various ways in which this practice fails, how you can practice in the wrong way and why, and see how we can improve on this, and we have an empowered practice. The practice, by the way, is not something to be done on a permanent basis. I see manifestation practice as right for some people in certain situations, but not as a thing that you do throughout your life that would be counterproductive and unnecessary. You do it in certain situations. Those are basically two kinds of situations. One is the situation when you feel called upon to create something new, or to do something helpful, to help something that you already are in the process of creating, but you need additional help, or you need an insight into the kind of creation that you are envisaging. The other practice is when a big challenge comes into your life, things are getting chaotic around you. Difficult people, difficult situation, loss of money, whatever it may be, there you need to combine accepting what is and changing what is. They're not contradictory, and we will have to look at that. Accepting the isness of things and yet changing. Healing is another thing that we need to look at. What is the role of conscious manifestation, possibly, in healing your body? Does it play a role? Is it effective? Is it necessary? Is it pointless? We'll have to look at that. So there's quite a bit to look at still, and in the meantime, don't forget to be in the present moment, because being in the present moment connects you with being. Being in the present moment brings the transcendent dimension into your life, just acknowledging the present moment. Aligning yourself with the present moment, then something opens up in you that is peaceful and spacious. Just that acceptance creates that spacious place within you. So it's always just the quickest way to being aligned with presence. The quickest way to being connected with the transcendent dimension is being aligned with the present moment. Very easy. And then if there's something that needs to be created, you create from there. We also need to look at your habitual thought processes, so that you become more aware of your habitual thought processes, and to see whether they help or hinder your creation, your manifestation. Are your habitual, how are your habitual thought processes? That's a very important point. And we also need to look at action you can take, little things you can take that are almost symbolic affirmations. Symbolic affirmations of the goodness of life, symbolic affirmations of abundance. And we must not forget to look at the importance of the inner attitude of appreciation of little things, especially appreciation that is sometimes called gratitude, the continuous appreciation of the small things of life, because most of your life is small things. Big events happen occasionally, but there's a wedding, there's a birthday, there's a trip, there's a vacation, there's Thanksgiving dinner, but in between there's ordinary, everyday life consisting of little things, and how do you relate to the little things of life? That also could be either a help or a hindrance. Thanks.